The cold metal walls of the Vex prison ship hummed with alien energy. Captain Hyun Woo stood behind thick glass, watching his best officer sit perfectly still in the detention chamber. Dr. So-Ra Kim had been captured 3 hours ago when their exploration mission went wrong. Now she faced something that made every species in the galaxy tremble with fear. The Vex interrogator was tall and thin with blue skin that seemed to glow under the harsh lights. His name was difficult for humans to say so. The crew called him Blue Death. His large black eyes had no pupils, just endless dark pools that could see into minds and steal thoughts from any living creature. The Vex were known across 12 star systems as the most dangerous telepaths in the galaxy. They could break into any brain within seconds and pull out every secret memory and hidden fear. But So-Ra was not like other prisoners. She sat in the metal chair with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes were closed and her breathing was slow and steady. She looked like she was sleeping or meditating, but inside her mind, a war was happening that no one could see. The Vex had made a mistake when they chose her for questioning. So-Ra was not just a communications officer. She was special in ways that even her own crew did not fully understand. She had been the youngest chess champion in Korea at age 12. She could solve math problems that made computers work hard. She had studied meditation with old masters in mountain temples since she was a small child. Her mind was like a fortress built from years of training and natural talent. Blue Death pressed his long fingers against his temples and focused all his telepathic power on the human female. He had broken the minds of warrior princes from the Stellar Empire. He had made the proud, crystalline queens beg for mercy by showing them their worst nightmares. He had never failed to extract information from any prisoner in his 300 years of service, but when he touched So-Ra mind, he found something impossible. Instead of the usual human thoughts about fear, pain, and desperate wishes to escape, he found a storm of activity that made no sense. She was playing chess games in her head, not just one game, but hundreds of them, all at the same time. She was solving complex mathematical equations that would take most beings days to work through. She was reciting ancient Korean poetry in perfect rhythm, while also composing new verses. The interrogator pushed harder, sending waves of telepathic force into her consciousness. He tried to find the military secrets about human ship locations and weapon capabilities, but every time he thought he found something important, it slipped away into another maze of thoughts. So-Ra was thinking about cooking recipes from her grandmother while designing space station blueprints, while remembering every book she had ever read. Lieutenant Min-ho Park watched from the observation deck above the detention chamber. He could see sweat forming on the Vex interrogator blue forehead. The alien was working harder than anyone had ever seen him work. The other Vex guards in the room were starting to look nervous. They had never seen their master struggle. With a prisoner before, engineer Tai Min-cho was monitoring the telepathic energy readings on his instruments. The numbers were going crazy. The Vex was using more psychic power than should be possible, but the human brain was somehow absorbing it all and asking for more. It was like watching someone try to empty an ocean with a small cup. So-Ra had learned this technique from her meditation teachers, but she had never used it for defense before. The old masters had taught her to fill her mind with multiple streams of thought to achieve perfect focus. Now, she was using the same skill to create perfect chaos. Any thought the Vex tried to grab would get lost in the storm of her mental activity inside her mind. So-Ra was calm and in control. She could feel the alien trying to break through her defenses, but it felt like gentle waves hitting a strong cliff. She kept adding more layers to her mental maze. She started planning her next research project while solving physics problems while remembering her favorite childhood songs. The Vex probe felt like a small fish trying to swim upstream in a powerful river. The other crew members had been watching for 2 hours now. Captain Hyun-woo had seen many interrogations during his military career, but nothing like this. Usually, prisoners would be screaming or begging within minutes. The Vex telepaths were famous for making strong warriors cry like children. But So-Ra looked more peaceful now than when she had started Blue Death eyes. Began to change color from black to dark blue. Small veins appeared on his forehead as he pushed his abilities beyond their normal limits. He had never encountered a mind like this one. Most beings thought in simple, straight lines about one thing at a time. This human female was thinking about dozens of complex topics simultaneously, and each thought was connected to hundreds of others in patterns that made no logical sense. The Vex had studied human prisoners before. They knew that human minds were more chaotic than most species, but they had always been able to find the important thoughts hidden underneath the surface noise. So our mind was different. It was not chaotic at all. It was organized in a way that the Vex could not understand. She was controlling the chaos and using it as a weapon. Communications specialist Da Hai watched her friend with growing amazement. So-Ra had always been the smartest person on the ship, but seeing her fight a telepathic battle while looking completely relaxed was something extraordinary. She was not just defending herself. She was teaching the entire galaxy something new about what human minds could do when properly trained. The interrogation chamber was designed to be uncomfortable and frightening. The walls were covered with sharp metal spikes. The lighting was too bright and changed colors to confuse prisoners. There were sounds of screaming and machinery that were meant to break down mental defenses, but So-Ra seemed completely unaware of her surroundings. She was somewhere else entirely lost in the beautiful complexity of her own thoughts. Blue Death tried a new approach. He attempted to project fear directly into So-Ra's brain, showing her images of her crew members being tortured and killed. But the images got lost in her mental storm. She was too busy composing a symphony while calculating stellar navigation routes while remembering conversations with her parents from 20 years ago. The Vex guards began whispering among themselves in their clicking language. They had never seen their master interrogator show signs of strain before. Some of them started to back away from the detention chamber as if they sensed danger approaching their greatest weapon against other species was failing against this single human female. Lieutenant Min-ho Park had been watching the interrogation for 3 hours, and he could see that something was going wrong. The Vex interrogator was getting angry and frustrated. His blue skin was turning darker, and his breathing was becoming heavy. Min-ho knew from his military training that angry interrogators were dangerous interrogators. When telepaths could not get what they wanted, they usually turned to violence. The security chief studied the detention chamber layout through the observation window. He had been planning rescue attempts in his head since So-Ra was captured, but the Vex ship was too well defended. The detention chamber was surrounded by energy barriers that could kill anyone who touched them. The only way in was through the main door, which was guarded by 6 heavily armed Vex soldiers. But now Min-ho was seeing something that changed everything. The interrogator was reaching toward his belt, where he kept a plasma weapon. The alien was giving up on the mind reading and preparing to torture So-Ra physically, or maybe even kill her. If he could not get information from her mind, he might decide that a dead human was better than a human who could resist Vex telepathy. Min-ho looked around the observation deck for anything he could use as a weapon or distraction. The room was mostly empty, except for monitoring equipment and a few metal chairs that the crew used during long watches. The chairs were heavy and made from reinforced steel designed to last for years in space. The legs were thick, and the seats were solid metal plates. An idea formed in Min-ho's mind. It was crazy and dangerous, but it was the only chance he could think of. The energy barrier around the detention chamber was designed to keep people from walking through it, but it might not be strong enough to stop a fast-moving object like a thrown chair. If he could get the chair through the barrier, it might distract the interrogator long enough for So-Ra to do something. The problem was that So-Ra was deep in her meditation state. Her eyes were closed and she seemed completely unaware of what was happening around her. If Min-Ho threw the chair, it might hit her and hurt her. But if he did nothing, the Vex interrogator would definitely hurt her. The choice was between a small risk and a certain danger. Captain Hyun-woo was standing next to Min-Ho watching the same scene. His face was tense with worry. He had known So-Ra for 5 years and had never seen her fail at anything she tried. But fighting a telepathic interrogation while staying aware of physical dangers seemed impossible even for her. The captain trusted his security chief judgment, but he was not sure about this plan. Min-Ho picked up one of the metal chairs and tested its weight. It was heavier than he had expected, but he was strong from years of military training. He had been a sports champion before joining the Space Force, and he knew how to throw objects with accuracy and power. The chair would have to travel about 10 meters through the energy barrier and land near So-Ra. Without hitting her engineer, Tae-min was still monitoring the telepathic energy readings. The numbers were getting higher and more unstable. The Vex interrogator was using dangerous amounts of psychic power, and his brain might start to overload soon. But dangerous aliens with overloaded brains were unpredictable. They might do anything, including killing prisoners, just to release their frustration. The other crew members gathered around Min-Ho as he explained his plan in whispers. They would have to time everything perfectly. The moment the interrogator reached for his weapon, Min-Ho would throw the chair. The goal was not to hurt anyone, but to break So-Ra concentration, just enough to confuse the telepathic connection. The sudden change in her mental state might give them a few seconds to act. Communications specialist Da-Hai was worried about her friend. She knew that So-Ra meditation was keeping her safe, but it also made her vulnerable to physical attacks. The chair might hit her, or the sudden distraction might let the Vex break through her mental defenses. It was a terrible choice between two dangerous options. Pilot Ji-woo suggested using the ship communication system to warn So-Ra, but Captain Hyun-woo shook his head. Any radio signal might alert the Vex guards and make the situation worse. They had to trust that. So-Ra's natural instincts would help her survive whatever happened next. The Vex interrogator was definitely reaching for his weapon now. His large black eyes were filled with rage, and his blue skin was almost purple with anger. He had never been defeated by a prisoner before, and his pride was hurt. He was muttering in the Vex language, which sounded like angry insects buzzing. The other Vex guards were watching him nervously, because they had never seen him lose control. Min-Ho lifted the chair above his head and aimed carefully. He had to throw it hard enough to break through the energy barrier, but not so hard that it would seriously hurt. So-Ra, if it hit her, the angle had to be perfect to avoid the Vex guards and the sharp metal spikes on the chamber walls. The security chief took a deep breath and focused on his target. So-Ra was sitting perfectly still in the center of the chamber, about 3 meters from the back wall. If he threw the chair at the right angle, it should pass behind her and land where she could grab it or use it for protection. The timing had to be exact. Because the interrogator was almost ready to draw his weapon, Captain Hyun-woo gave a small nod to show he approved the plan. The other crew members stepped back to give Min-Ho room to throw. The engineer kept watching his instruments, ready to report any changes in the telepathic readings. The moment came suddenly. The Vex interrogator hand touched his weapon and started to pull it from his belt. Min-Ho threw the chair with all his strength. The heavy metal seat spun through the air end over end, heading straight for the energy barrier. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see if the barrier would stop the chair or let it through. The chair hit the energy barrier, and sparks flew in all directions. For a second, it looked like the barrier would hold. But then the chair pushed through with a loud crackling sound that echoed through the detention chamber. The barrier flickered and went dim. but did not completely fail. Now the chair was flying through the air toward So-Ray back. She was still sitting in perfect meditation position with her eyes closed and no sign that she knew about the danger approaching her. The chair was spinning fast and would hit her in just a few seconds. The Vex interrogator looked up in surprise as the chair flew past him. He had been so focused on his telepathic battle that he had not noticed the activity in the observation deck. Now he saw the human crew watching him and realized they were trying to rescue their officer. Min-Ho watched his throw. With growing fear, the chair was moving faster than he had expected, and the angle looked wrong. It might hit So-Ray in the head or knock her out of her chair. Either way, it would probably break her concentration and leave her defenseless against the Vex telepathic attack. The other crew members were shouting warnings, but their voices could not reach through the energy barrier. So-Ra was on her own, facing a heavy metal chair flying at her back while fighting the most powerful telepath in Vex space. Her next few seconds would determine whether she lived or died. What happened next would be talked about in bars and spaceports across the galaxy for decades to come. The heavy metal chair was spinning through the air straight toward So-Ra back, moving fast enough to knock her unconscious or break her bones. Everyone watching expected to see her get hit and probably killed, but So-Ra did something that defied everything anyone knew about human abilities without opening her eyes or breaking her meditation pose. So-Ra somehow sensed the approaching chair. Her head tilted slightly to the left as if she was listening to something only she could hear. Then in one smooth movement that looked like it had been planned and practiced for years, she leaned back and shifted her body position. The chair slid, perfectly beneath her like she had called it to her. The metal seat caught her just as she sat down, and the spinning motion stopped instantly. She was now sitting comfortably in the throne chair, still maintaining her telepathic defenses against the Vex interrogator. Her eyes remained closed and her breathing stayed calm and steady. The Vex interrogator's jaw dropped so far that his mouth hung open like a broken door. His large black eyes went wide with shock, and his telepathic probe into So-Ra's mind stuttered and weakened. He had been interrogating prisoners for 300 years and had seen every kind of resistance and trick that different species could use. But he had never seen anything like what just happened. Captain Hyun Woo felt his legs go weak with amazement. He grabbed the observation deck railing to keep from falling down. In all his years of military service, he had seen soldiers do incredible things under pressure. But this was beyond incredible. This was impossible. So-Ra had just demonstrated awareness timing and physical coordination that should not exist, while her mind was fully occupied with telepathic defense. Lieutenant Min-Ho Park stared at his friend with his mouth hanging open. He had thrown the chair, hoping to create a distraction, but So-Ra had turned it into something beautiful and perfect. The way she had moved was like watching a master dancer perform a routine she had practiced 1,000 times. But he knew she had never practiced this, because no one could practice catching a flying chair while fighting off a mind-reader engineer. Tai Min-Cho looked at his instruments and saw something that made him question everything he knew about human biology. The telepathic energy readings showed that So-Ra's mental defenses had actually gotten stronger after she caught the chair. Her brain activity was more organized and more powerful than before. Instead of being distracted by the physical action, she had somehow used it to improve her mental focus. The other Vex guards in the detention chamber backed away from their positions. They were looking at So-Ra like she was some kind of supernatural creature. Their species had evolved telepathic abilities over millions of years, and they thought they understood how minds worked. But this human female was showing them that their understanding was limited and incomplete. Communications specialist Da Hai whispered the same question that everyone was thinking. How did So-Ra know? The chair was coming when her eyes were closed and her mind was busy with telepathic combat. The answer seemed impossible, but they had all seen it happen. She must have heard something or felt something or sensed something that normal beings could not detect. The Vex interrogator tried to push deeper into Soa Raw mind, using more psychic power than he had ever used before. But now her mental defenses were like trying to break through solid stone with bare hands. Every thought he tried to grab slipped away into organized patterns that made perfect sense to her, but no sense to him. She was playing chess games while solving math problems, while composing poetry, while designing buildings, while planning meals, and somehow keeping all of it, connected in ways that his telepathic abilities could not follow. Soa had learned something important when she caught the chair. Her meditation teachers had always told her that the body and mind were connected in ways that most people did not understand. When she moved her body in perfect harmony with her mental state, both became stronger. She was now sitting in a position that felt exactly right for her current level of mental focus. The chair itself was helping her in unexpected ways. The metal was cool against her back and gave her a sense of stability and strength. The height was perfect for her meditation posture, and the solid seat made her feel grounded and secure. She had accidentally created the ideal environment for telepathic defense by catching a piece of furniture that was thrown to distract her. Pilot Ji Woo was recording everything on the ship's security cameras. He knew that no one would believe this story without video proof. A human officer had just caught a heavy chair thrown from behind her while fighting the most powerful telepath in known space, and she had done it without breaking concentration or even opening her eyes. The Vex interrogator was beginning to show signs of serious strain. Blue veins were bulging on his forehead, and his breathing was becoming labored. His telepathic abilities were being pushed beyond their safe limits, but he could not accept defeat. His pride and his reputation were at stake. If word spread that a human had defeated him in mental combat, the entire Vex Empire would lose face. So Ra could feel the alien getting desperate and dangerous. His telepathic probe was becoming wilder and less controlled, like an animal caught in a trap. She responded by adding even more layers to her mental maze. She started composing music while calculating space navigation routes, while remembering every conversation she had ever had with her family. The complexity of her thoughts was growing exponentially. The detention chamber was designed to break prisoners through fear and discomfort. But Ra was now more comfortable than she had been since her capture. The chair fit her body perfectly and gave her a sense of control over her environment. She was no longer a helpless prisoner sitting on an uncomfortable metal bench. She was a person who could catch flying furniture without looking and turn any situation to her advantage. The other crew members were starting to understand that they were witnessing something that would change how the galaxy viewed human beings. Every species knew that humans were unpredictable and sometimes dangerous in combat, but no one had realized that human minds could be trained to levels that surpassed even the most advanced telepathic. Species Medical Officer Su Jin was thinking about the biological implications of what she was seeing. The human brain was supposed to have limitations on how many complex tasks it could handle simultaneously. But Soa was proving that those limitations could be overcome with proper training and mental discipline. She was rewriting the textbooks on human neurological capabilities. The Vex guards were whispering among themselves in their clicking language. Their master interrogator was failing, and they did not know what to do. Their entire military strategy was based on the assumption that Vex telepaths could break any enemy resistance. But if humans could train their minds to resist telepathic attacks, the balance of power in the galaxy might shift. So Ra felt a sense of calm satisfaction as she sat in her perfectly positioned chair. She had turned a potential disaster into an advantage, and her mental defenses were now stronger than ever. The Vex interrogator was wearing himself out, trying to break through barriers that were actually getting thicker and more complex. She could maintain this level of mental activity for hours, while he was already approaching his physical limits. The Vex interrogator was now using telepathic power that should have killed most beings. His blue skin had turned almost black, with the strain and veins were standing out all over his head like twisted ropes. But instead of breaking through, ray defenses. He was making them stronger. Every time he pushed harder, she responded by adding more complexity to her mental maze. So Ra had discovered something that her meditation teachers never told her, because they had never faced a situation like this. The harder someone tried to break into her mind, the more creative and organized her thoughts became. It was like the telepathic pressure was feeding her mental abilities and making them grow beyond their normal limits. She was now composing 3 different symphonies while solving advanced physics equations, while designing a new type of spacecraft, while reciting poetry in 4 languages, while playing chess against 12 different imaginary opponents, and keeping track of every move. In every game, the amount of mental activity happening in her brain would have overwhelmed a computer, but she was handling it all with perfect control. The Vex interrogator tried a new approach. He began projecting images of torture and death directly into So-Ra consciousness, showing her what would happen to her crew if she did not cooperate. But the horrible images got lost in her mental storm, like drops of poison in a vast ocean. She was too busy planning her next research project while calculating stellar navigation routes while remembering her favorite childhood stories. Engineer Tae Min was watching his instruments with growing amazement. The telepathic energy readings were off the scale. The Vex was putting out more psychic power than their equipment could measure, but instead of overwhelming the human brain, it seemed to be making it work better. So raw brain activity was more organized and efficient than any human brain on record. Captain Hyun-woo was beginning to understand what was happening. So-Ra was not just defending against the telepathic attack. She was using the energy from the attack to fuel her own mental processes. The Vex interrogator was accidentally making her smarter and more focused with every probe he sent into her mind. The other Vex guards were starting to look frightened. They had never seen their master struggle with any prisoner, let alone a member of the weak human species that had only recently joined the galactic community. Their greatest weapon against other civilizations was failing against a single female who was sitting calmly in a chair. Communications specialist Da Hai noticed that So-Ra breathing had changed from the slow, steady rhythm of meditation to something deeper and more powerful. She looked like she was drawing energy from the air itself and using it to strengthen her mental defenses. The telepathic battle was making her stronger instead of weaker. The Vex interrogator was beginning to make mistakes. His telepathic probe was becoming unfocused and desperate instead of the precise surgical strikes that had made him famous. He was like a master swordsman who had suddenly forgotten how to hold his weapon properly. The mental strain was affecting his judgment and his technique. So-Ra could feel the alien probe getting weaker and more erratic. She responded by shifting her mental defenses into a new configuration that she had never tried before. Instead of just blocking the telepathic attacks, she began to reflect them back at the interrogator. Every time he tried to read her thoughts, she sent him a burst of her own mental energy. The effect was like hitting the Vex with a wall of organized chaos. His telepathic abilities were designed to handle the simple thought patterns of most species, but So-Ra's mind was too complex and too fast for him to process. She was thinking at a level that exceeded his ability to understand, and every thought was connected to hundreds of others in patterns that made his head hurt. Medical Officer Su Jin was watching the Vex interrogator vital signs through the detention chamber medical scanners. His heart rate was dangerously high, and his brain activity was showing signs of overload. If he continued pushing his telepathic abilities this hard, he might suffer permanent brain damage or even death. The metal chair that So-Ra was sitting in had become part of her defense strategy. The cool metal against her back helped her stay grounded and focused, while the solid structure gave her a sense of stability that enhanced her meditation. The throne chair had accidentally become the perfect tool for telepathic resistance. Lieutenant Min Ho was amazed at how his desperate plan had worked out. He had intended to break Soara concentration for just a few seconds, but instead he had helped her create an even stronger defense. The chair catch had shown her that she could handle multiple complex tasks simultaneously, and that discovery had unlocked new levels of mental ability. The Vex interrogator tried one final desperate attack. He gathered all his remaining telepathic power and launched it at Sora's mind in a focused beam that should have shattered her consciousness and left her a mindless shell. But instead of breaking through her defenses, the attack was absorbed and transformed into new mental energy that made her thoughts even clearer and more organized. So Ra was now operating at a level of mental efficiency that no human had ever achieved. She was solving complex problems while composing beautiful art, while planning military strategies, while remembering every detail of her entire life and keeping it all organized in perfect harmony. The telepathic attacks had pushed her beyond the normal limits of human consciousness. The other crew members were witnessing the birth of something new in human evolution. So Ra was proving that the human mind had capabilities that no one had suspected. When properly trained and pushed to its limits, the human brain could exceed the telepathic abilities of species that had evolved those powers over millions of years. The Vex guards were backing toward the exits of the detention chamber. Their master interrogator was clearly losing the battle, and they were afraid of what might happen next. Never in their history had a Vex telepath been defeated by a prisoner, and they did not know how to handle the situation. Blood was starting to drip from the interrogator's nose as his brain began to overload from the telepathic strain. His large black eyes were rolling back in his head, and his breathing was becoming shallow and rapid. He was approaching the point where his nervous system would shut down to protect itself from further damage. So, Ra felt the moment when the Vex telepathic probe finally broke. The alien mind suddenly went quiet, and she was alone in her own thoughts for the first time in hours. The silence felt strange after the constant pressure of the telepathic attack, but she maintained her meditation pose and kept her mental defenses active in case the interrogator tried to attack again. The detention chamber fell silent, except for the heavy breathing of the overworked Vex interrogator. The other aliens in the room stared at Ra with expressions of fear and amazement. They had just watched their greatest weapon fail against a human female who had turned their attack into her own strength. The great Vex interrogator collapsed to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. His blue skin had turned pale gray and foam was coming from his mouth. The most feared telepath in the galaxy had been defeated by a human female sitting in a chair. The sound of his body hitting the metal floor echoed through the detention chamber like thunder. Ra slowly opened her eyes for the first time in 4 hours. She looked around the chamber calmly, as if she was waking up from a pleasant afternoon nap. Her breathing was still slow and steady, and there was no sign of the intense mental battle she had just fought. Her dark eyes were clear and focused as she studied her captors. The Vex guards were frozen in shock and terror. They stared at their fallen master, then back at the human female who had somehow broken the mind of their greatest weapon. Some of them were trembling, and all of them had backed as far away from Ra as possible. The detention chamber suddenly felt like a cage that was holding the wrong prisoner. Ra stood up from the chair with graceful movements that showed no sign of fatigue or weakness. She had been sitting in the same position for hours, but she moved like someone who had just finished a relaxing exercise session. The metal chair had supported her perfectly, and she felt more energized than when the interrogation began. The human female looked directly at the nearest Vex guard and spoke in perfect Vex language that she had learned by listening to their conversations while they thought her mind was occupied. Her pronunciation was flawless, and her grammar was more advanced than most native speakers. The guard stumbled backward in surprise. "Hello," she said with polite formality. "I believe we should discuss the release of my crew members now. The terms of our previous arrangement seem to have changed somewhat." Her voice was calm and friendly, but there was something in her tone that made the aliens nervous. She sounded like someone who was now in control of the situation. The Vex guards looked at each other with expressions of panic and confusion. They had been trained to handle prisoners who begged for mercy or tried to escape or fought with weapons, but they had no protocol for dealing with someone who had just defeated their master interrogator and was now speaking to them like a diplomat at a peace conference. Captain Hyun-woo was watching from the observation deck with his mouth hanging open. So Ara had not only survived the telepathic interrogation, she had somehow learned the alien language during the process and was now conducting negotiations from a position of strength. The tables had completely turned in the space of a few minutes. One of the Vex guards managed to find his voice and asked in broken galactic standard how she had resisted their master telepathic abilities. So Ra smiled gently and replied in fluent Vex that human minds were trained differently than other species. She explained that meditation and mental discipline were common practices among her people. The guard translated her response for the others, and their fear grew even stronger. If this was normal for humans, then they had seriously underestimated the species that had recently joined the galactic community. The implications were terrifying for the Vex Empire, which relied on telepathic superiority to control other civilizations. So Ara gestured toward the unconscious interrogator and suggested in polite Vex that he needed medical attention. Her concern for his well-being after he had tried to torture her mind seemed genuine. The guards were confused by her kindness toward someone who had been their enemy just moments before. Communications specialist Da Hai was recording everything for the ship logs. This was the first time in galactic history that anyone had witnessed a successful defense against Vex telepathic interrogation. The recording would be studied by military strategists and scientists across dozens of worlds. Engineer Tai Mian was still monitoring his instruments, and the readings showed something remarkable. So RA brain activity had returned to normal human levels, but her mental organization remained enhanced. The telepathic battle had permanently improved her cognitive abilities. She was now operating at a higher level of mental efficiency than before. The Vex guards were whispering among themselves in rapid clicking sounds that indicated extreme agitation. They kept glancing at Sorey with expressions that mixed fear with something that might have been respect. Never before had they encountered a prisoner who could defeat their interrogation methods and then show concern for their interrogator well-being. Lieutenant Min Ho was thinking about the military implications of what had just happened. If humans could train their minds to resist Vex telepathy, then the balance of power in this part of the galaxy would shift dramatically. The Vex Empire controlled dozens of worlds through fear of their mind-reading abilities. So Ra walked slowly around the detention chamber, examining the walls and equipment with the curiosity of a scientist studying interesting specimens. She seemed completely comfortable in the space that had been designed to break prisoners through psychological pressure. The sharp metal spikes and harsh lighting had no effect on her calm demeanor. The human female stopped in front of the main guard and spoke again in perfect Vex. She suggested that continued hostility would not benefit either species, and that cooperation might lead to better outcomes for everyone involved. Her diplomatic language was more sophisticated than most Vex politicians could manage. Medical Officer Su Jin was analyzing the unconscious interrogator, vital signs through the detention chamber scanners. His brain showed signs of severe telepathic exhaustion, but no permanent damage. He would recover physically, but his confidence and reputation would never be the same. The Vex guards were clearly out of their depth. They had been trained to handle violent prisoners and desperate escapees, but not diplomatic negotiations with someone who had just demonstrated superior mental abilities, their usual tactics of intimidation, and threats seemed foolish when facing someone who had defeated their greatest weapon. So Ra asked politely if she could have some water and perhaps something to eat. She had been maintaining intense mental activity for hours, and her body needed fuel to recover. The casual nature of her request after winning such a decisive victory made the guards even more nervous. Captain Hyun-woo realized that his communications officer had just changed the strategic situation in this entire sector of space. The Vex would have to recalculate their relationships with human colonies and trading posts. If one human could do this, what might a trained military unit accomplish? The detention chamber door opened, and more Vex soldiers entered, but they stopped when they saw their master interrogator unconscious on the floor and the human female standing calmly in the center of the room. The newcomers looked around in confusion, trying to understand what had happened. So Ra turned toward the new arrivals and greeted them in flawless Vex with the same polite formality she had shown the guards. She introduced herself by name and rank, and expressed hope that they could resolve the current situation through peaceful negotiation rather than continued conflict. The senior officer among the new arrivals stared at the unconscious interrogator, then at the human female who was speaking his language better than some of his own troops. He had been expecting to find a broken prisoner ready for execution, but instead he found someone who seemed to be conducting a diplomatic meeting. News of the interrogation traveled through Vex space faster than any ship could fly. The story was too incredible for most beings to believe, but too well documented to deny a human female had defeated the greatest Vex telepath while sitting in a chair that had been thrown at her from behind. The implications sent shock waves through the political and military establishments of dozens of worlds. Within 6 hours, every major news network in the sector was broadcasting footage of Soara catching the chair and the subsequent collapse of the Vex interrogator. The video was analyzed by experts who confirmed that it was real and unedited. Military strategists across the galaxy began emergency meetings to discuss what this meant for their defense plans. The Vex High Command was in chaos. They had built their empire on the fear that their telepaths could break any mind and steal any secret. But now, there was proof that humans could not only resist their greatest weapon, but could actually turn it against them. The foundation of their power structure was cracking. So Ra and her crew were released immediately with formal apologies from the Vex commander. The alien leader offered a full peace treaty and suggested establishing diplomatic relations between their species. The sudden change from hostile interrogation to friendly negotiation happened so quickly that it left the human crew dizzy. Captain Hyun-woo accepted the peace offer but insisted on safe passage to the nearest human colony. The Vex agreed and provided an escort of their fastest ships. The same aliens who had been planning to torture information from human prisoners were now treating them like honored diplomats, as the human ship prepared to leave Vex space. Word was already spreading to other species. The Crystalline Queens sent urgent messages to their intelligence networks asking for more information about human mental capabilities. The Stellar Empire began reviewing their files on human colonies and trading. Post-communications.